In this video, I cover all things baseball hats, from sourcing, keywords to know, cleaning, photographing, and shipping tips, and at the end, I'll even point out some great bolo brands to keep an eye out for. So let's get right into it. First off, why resell hats? Hats are honestly one of my favorite items to resell. They generally have a very low buy cost. I also love that they are easy to store. If you are like us and you don't have a ton of extra space, then hats are a great item to look into reselling. You can stack them all together like this and they take up very little space, and they're also super easy to list and to ship. So just a few reasons why I love reselling hats. So let's start at the very beginning with sourcing. You are out looking at hats. What are some things to keep in mind and to look for? One of the most important things to pay attention to when you are outsourcing hats is condition. One of the things I especially like to pay attention to is the sweatband, which is just right in here. This is a good example of one that probably would not be great to pick up. You can see this one's just really dirty and stained versus this one that's really clean. There aren't really any stains. So that's ideal if you can find that. Now there are exceptions though. If you come across a hat that's really unique, that's vintage, or sometimes has that workwear aesthetic, then oftentimes you can get away with poor condition. I also like to pay attention to the bill. Sometimes the plastic within the bill can get really brittle and snap. You can just gently feel the bill and you can generally tell if it's really brittle. So that's just a quick, easy thing to check. Also, you want to check the embroidery, just make sure it's in good condition. Another important thing to check with checker hats is the foam that's in the inside. If it is crumbling or kind of flaking off, that's generally not a good sign and not very desirable. So I would probably leave that hat behind, unless of course it falls under that exception where it's really rare or solds are showing that it goes for a lot of money, etc. Then I might consider still buying it. It's also a good idea to look inside at the tag, especially hats that are fitted. If it's a fitted hat and you cannot see the sizing of the tag, it might be a little trickier to sell. And then last but definitely not least, you want to check the fastener. If it's a hat like the snapback that has the fastener, you just want to open it up, make sure everything's still in good condition, that it can still fasten as it should, and that these little plastic pieces aren't worn or gone. Now I know you can replace this snapback. I have not ever done that, but if you come across a hat that's just super awesome, but the snapback fasteners are all worn, then you could possibly look at that as an option. Another thing to keep an eye out for when you're outsourcing hats is what the hat is made of, the materials. So you look at the material tags. A lot of times, especially the newer hats, they are all polyester. I don't know if you can see this tag, but a lot of the older vintage hats were made out of wool or a wool blend. And also, for example, corduroy hats, sometimes those can hold more value. So if you come across a hat that's of a little bit higher quality material, definitely worth taking a minute to look up. The last thing I wanted to touch on as far as what to look for when you're outsourcing is what kind of hats to pick up. The biggest thing that I would say is look for hats with interesting subject matter. Generally, unique sells. If you come across a hat that looks super unique, don't be afraid to look it up. Most likely, it could be a great pickup. So here's a great example of a hat with very interesting subject matter that otherwise looks very unassuming. It's just a very basic trucker's hat. It is vintage, you can tell from the tag here. However, it's not a nice quality embroidered hat, which that's another thing to keep an eye out for. I didn't mention hats with big patches or embroidery generally denote more value than a hat that's just screen printed like this. But it says, Mike Milton, we believe in you. And this hat just sold on eBay for $300. Which is crazy, but it's because of the subject matter. I personally did not know who Mike Milken was, so I looked it up. He's known for his role in the development of the market for high yield bonds, aka junk bonds. He was the head of the high yield department at Drexel Burnham Lambert, and he was imprisoned for fraud. Later, he was pardoned by Donald Trump in 2020. So this is a great example. If you come across a hat that is really unique or something maybe you're not familiar with, take a minute to look it up because you might be surprised what it could sell for on eBay. Also, as far as subject matter goes, a few other things to look for are vintage 90s baseball caps. These are really popular right now. Any hats with recognizable brands, examples would be Apple, Harley Davidson. Anything Americana, think John Deere, NASCAR, gas, oil industries, farm, anything that falls within that workwear aesthetic can do really well. Also, higher end hunting and outdoor brands can be great. For example, Kuiu, Sitka, Arc'teryx, Patagonia, Cotopaxi. Anything with patches or embroidery tend to do better than something that's just, heat pressed like that. So you've sourced some hats, now you're ready to photograph them. Here are a couple of tips that will hopefully be helpful for you. If you have a hat that just won't stay full when you set it down to photograph it and it looks all limp like this, you can take just one of these packing air bubbles and stick it inside like so, and then it will stay nice and firm and filled out and just lets you have better photographs. If you don't have one of these packing air bubbles, you can also use plastic bags or really anything that will fill that open cavity within the hat just to keep it firm while you're taking photos. And if you get really into reselling hats, you can even invest in a mannequin. But if you're just getting started, then something as simple as this does the trick. Also, when you're photographing hats, it's like anything that you're listing on eBay. You just want to make sure you take really thorough photographs. You want to point to any blemishes that might be on the hat. Make sure you show a good picture of the sweatband, especially if there's staining, make sure that shows up. If it's a trucker hat and there's foam, show the condition of the foam, show the tags and the materials. And then I always like to take a picture of the snapback fastener open, just so that they can see that it's in good condition. And of course, if some of them are worn, I make sure and point that out and mention it in the description as well. Now I wanted to touch on some keywords that you can include in your title that will help your hat sell. One of the most important is just knowing the style of your hat. So this is a snapback hat. It's just like it sounds. It has this back fastener that kind of snaps. So that's an easy one to remember. I feel like this is one of the more common ones that most people know. There are also strap back hats. So it has a fastener that looks like this. A trucker hat is generally known as a hat with the mesh back and generally the foam on the inside, like this style. A lot of times it'll also have the rope along the front here, so that's another keyword that you can include if it does have the rope. This isn't a hat that I picked up to resell, it's just one that somebody gifted me, but this is a pretty standard trucker hat style, so I thought it would be a good one to use as an example. There are also fitted caps that look like this. You can generally tell by looking on the inside, and there is the sizing here. So this is 7 5/8. So if you have a hat like this without a fastener on the back and the sizing inside, generally it's fitted and you want to make sure to include that sizing. And then there are flex fit hats. So this is kind of a hybrid hat in my mind. It doesn't have a fastener on the back, but it's not fitted. For example, this one fits sizes large to extra large. It has a little bit of a stretchier band, and a lot of times it will say flex fit as well. So those are all key indicators that it's a flex fit hat. And then last is a camper or camp hat. Sometimes you'll see them listed as a 5-panel hat as well, but a 5-panel hat can also look a little bit more like a classic hat. The paneling is just these separate panels. The camper hat tends to be a little bit more squished, if you will. The front panel is just a little bit shorter. The top is a little bit longer. Oftentimes, you'll see the style of hat a lot with running and cycling companies or outdoor companies. As far as design, there are also some really great keywords to know, so I will point those out and show examples. The first is shark tooth, or sometimes there's even a double shark tooth design. It looks just like it sounds. With this jagged design, it kind of looks like a shark tooth, and you can see that these can bring in really great money, especially the vintage ones. This vintage Hornets hat sold for $99 in shipping. Here's a Raiders one that sold for $90, and then this Green Bay Packers one sold for $30. So not quite as much, but still a great return if you can pick it up for $1 or so at the bins. Another keyword to know is diamond or diamond spike. This vintage Eagles hat sold for $124.99 plus shipping, and then this vintage Packers hat sold for $59 plus shipping. The next keyword is big logo, and this one again is just like it sounds. It has a huge logo. A lot of times it will cover the whole hat, like this New England Patriots hat is a good example. Here's a vintage 90s Florida Gators hat with a big logo print, and it sold for $275. So you can see there is some really good money in these vintage baseball hats, especially if you can find some with these cooler, more unique designs like the ones that we've been going over. Scrambled eggs is another keyword to know, and scrambled eggs are these leaf-like embellishments. They're generally yellow, and I guess they kind of look like scrambled eggs in a way. Traditionally, these were worn by military officers, but a lot of times you'll see them on other brands as well. For example, this Harley Davidson hat sold for $49.99 plus shipping. So that's definitely a keyword you're going to want to include if you come across a hat with that scrambled egg design on it. Splash is another one that you see a lot, especially on these 90s vintage baseball hats. And it kind of looks just like a splash, like it sounds. Three stripe is one that you'll often find on vintage trucker hats, and it just has these three stripes on the side. This is definitely a desirable design and a great keyword to include if you find a hat that has those three stripes. Script is a keyword you can use if the team name is spelled out. You can see here with this Packers hat, Packers is embroidered on the hat, sold for $44.95 in shipping. Here's a vintage Omaha Royals. They use script as a keyword in the title as well because it is written out on the hat. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last two that I have are Shockwave. It kind of has this wave design throughout the hat. Here's another example, a little bit different. And then this Miami Dolphins vintage hat sold for $80 plus shipping with the Shockwave design. And then the last keyword is brand specific to Patagonia. But if you have a Patagonia hat that has this design with the mountain range, which a lot of these hats do have that. There's the bison with the Fitzroy mountain range and the trout. So Fitzroy is another great keyword you can include. Fitzroy is a mountain range in Patagonia that borders Argentina and Chile. So that's just another keyword you can throw in there when you are selling Patagonia hats to hopefully help your items sell. I also wanted to touch briefly on how we ship our hats if you're new to selling hats. And thankfully hats are really easy to ship. We like to put our hats in a plastic bag first just to protect it from moisture and infecting. So we would put it in this bag, seal it up, and then we like to use these 8x8x8 boxes. We get these from eBay with our quarterly coupon, and these are a tad big for hats, honestly, so you probably could size down a little bit. But we just love this size of box. We use it for lots of things. It's really versatile. So for that reason, we like that size of box. Generally, we found that hats currently cost us around $6 to ship. Of course, it's going to depend on where the hat's shipping to and where you are located. And we usually ship hats just Ground Advantage. I'll link the shipping supplies that we use below if you want to check those out. Really, it doesn't have to be an exact science. As long as the hat is protected and is in a box that fits the hat, then you're probably good to go. I will say I highly recommend always shipping hats in a box though. You definitely don't want to throw them in a poly bag just because they do need some protection and the box helps provide that. And then, it's up to you. We like the plastic just because we feel like it provides an extra layer of protection, but that's probably not as necessary as the boxes. I also wanted to touch on cleaning hats. I will say that if we find a hat that will sell for a lot of money or that's really unique, really vintage, fragile, then most of the times we won't even touch it. We will just sell it as is and then let the person that's buying the hat decide if they want to clean it or leave it as is. A lot of times with the Americana workwear style hats, those actually do just fine being a little dirty or distressed. We just recently sold a Masters hat. I'll put it here. We picked it up at the bins for $1 and you can see it sold for great money. And we did not clean that. We left it as is. Now for cheaper hats, those that we pick up for $1 and then we're gonna sell them for $15 to $20, then I might experiment a little more with cleaning depending on, the condition. With trucker hats that have the foam, generally I would say hand washing is probably your best bet. You can just make a mild soap solution with water and some dish soap and use a toothbrush and just gently scrub the trouble areas. I definitely would not soak trucker hats that have the foam and vintage hats that have cardboard in the build because that's just going to disintegrate the cardboard and mess with the foam. So those I would just gently hand wash. Some of the more modern hats, they can take a little bit more wear and tear as far as cleaning. I was really curious about these hat cages, so I got one and I experimented with it. These can be used in the dishwasher on the top rack just with some dish soap, or you can also throw them in your washing machine as long as it doesn't have the center agitator. So I tried it out on this hat. I'll show you some before video right here. You can see that it was really stained. It had a lot of of pet hair all over it, so I just used the lint roller first and got all of the pet hair off. I will say this hat was part of a huge hat lot that we bought, so we were already in profit for the lot. And this hat was just one that we hadn't listed yet because it was super stained and really bad condition. If we were out in the wild and came across this hat, I probably wouldn't pick it up just because it was in such rough condition. Especially the sweatband was really nasty, so I would have probably left this behind. But because it was in the lot and it's essentially free at this point, I decided to experiment with it. So I treated it with some spray and wash, and then I put it in the hat cage like so, and then I just threw it in the washer with just a few other little pieces of clothing. And then after you pull it out, you just keep it in the cage until it dries. That helps it keep its shape. I felt like it did a really good job of helping it keep its shape. I've also seen people use these just after they hand wash them, and they put it on the top to kind of help it dry with its shape, so you could do that as well. But I will say it didn't clean up as much as I was hoping it would. It looks better than it did. Maybe next time I'll try soaking it in some OxiClean. If you have some great hat cleaning tips, drop them below, please. I would love to hear. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on were just some bolo brands to keep an eye out for. As we saw already with the keyword designs, vintage baseball hats or caps are doing really well right now. Some vintage baseball cap brands to keep an eye out for are Sports Specialties, New Era, Logo Athletic, and Starter. A lot of times you can tell if it's vintage or not just based on where it was made. Of course, made in the USA is a good telltale sign that it's a vintage hat. Also, sometimes they are made in Taiwan. Also know that sadly there are some knockoffs or fakes out there. So just make sure to research your hats. And there's tons of great articles online as well that will help you date a hat. So tons of great resources out there. With trucker hats, K Products is a great brand to keep an eye out for. I was also seeing a lot of Polo Ralph Lauren hats, especially the vintage ones, selling on eBay for good money. You can see here they're not all selling for great money. This one sold for $16.99 in shipping, but this one, it has the Chinese New Year dragon on it. Wool cap sold for $149.95. Here is a vintage sailing cap sold for $150 in shipping. But even this newer Polo Ralph Lauren running hat sold for $38.99 in shipping. So I was seeing some great comps within this brand. Vintage master hats are also a great one to keep an eye out for. One that I found really interesting that I came across in my research was this Pleats Please hat. Pleats Please is made by Izzy Miyake. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. This is a Japanese designer that uses a pleating technique, and these hats are really unique. You can see the pleated design. It sold for $120. Here's another one that sold for $120 plus shipping, and I will just zoom in so you can see it up close. So you can see here, it has a really unique pleated design. Another unique hat I was seeing selling were hats from Zach Bryan's tours. This one just says Godspeed on it, sold for $135.99. Here's another one that says Godspeed on it from Zach Bryan's Quit in Time tour. He literally has one picture and it's just of him holding the hat at the concert. It sold for $149.99. And then here's one more. It says No Good Ramblin' Man. It's also a Zach Bryan hat. You can see here on the side it says Zach Bryan. So again, that one just goes back to, you see a unique hat, take the time to look it up. It might surprise you. And the last brand I wanted to point out was Gorin Brothers. This is a family-owned hat company based in the US. Their hats are known for their high-quality materials, and then they have a lot of unique designs. You can see this one with the wolf sold for $44.95. You can see a lot of these sell for good money. They all have really cool, unique graphics or subject matter. So again, let this be a baseline for you, and then look up the specific item you come across to make sure it makes sense to pick up for your store. Please let me know in the comments if you find these styles of videos helpful, if you'd like to see more of these. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.